Do you ever pick up your phone, open an app, close the app, and then open it straight back up again? So I've been listening to Nir Eyal, who talks about why we get so distracted and form these bad habits so easily. So what do you think the opposite of distraction is? Focus? Nah. He says the opposite of distraction is traction. Traction is any action that pulls you towards the kind of person you want to be and the values you want to live by. Distraction is any action that pulls you away from that. Both words end in action. They're not things that happen to us, but things that we decide to do. So any action can be traction or distraction. For example, going on Instagram is commonly seen as a distraction, and it is if you're on it when there's more important things that you know you should be doing. It could also be traction, for example, if one of your core values is contribution and you use Instagram to share content with people. So in the book Hooked by Nir Eyal, he talks about how we form habits to things in 4 stages. The first stage are triggers. A trigger is anything that causes traction or distraction, and there's 2 types. The first type are external triggers, which is anything in your outside environment, so the pings and dings from your phone, another person, the TV on in the background, and it's not necessarily bad all the time. For example, I've got reminders set up on my phone for me to go for a walk or eat some fruit, but I think the majority of the time they are distracting. The second type of trigger are internal triggers, which are more powerful because it's when the distraction begins from within you. It's when we look to escape from the discomfort caused by certain emotions like boredom, fatigue, anxiety, stress, or uncertainty. So the second stage is the action, right? The trigger makes you do something. So this is the behavior that we do in order to get a reward, like a dopamine hit. So say for example, the trigger is an external ring from your phone or an internal feeling of boredom, and the action is to scroll through a social media feed looking for something interesting. So the third stage is a variable reward. When you look through your feed, you don't always find something interesting, and it's been deliberately designed that way. So this comes from experiments from an American psychologist called B.F. Skinner back in the 50s, who did experiments using pigeons. So when the pigeons were hungry, they'd peck at a disc to get food pellets. But one day he was running low on these food pellets, so he could only give them to the pigeons sometimes. But what he found was that the pigeons pecked more often when they could only get the food pellets sometimes, as opposed to when they could get them all the time. So the pigeons pecked at the disc more when there was a variable reward as opposed to a consistent reward. So this same behaviour has been observed in humans and is deeply ingrained into us. It goes right down to the core of how we behave. So this mechanic doesn't just exist in social media feeds, but it's seen in gambling, it's seen in watching TV. Like think of live sports where the variable reward is we don't know when someone's going to score a goal, or watching the news where the variable reward is breaking news. Even things like a good book, right? The uncertainty of these things is what's captivating. So the 4th step completes the hook and it's known as the investment phase. So it's when you do something to the product that makes you more likely to use it again. So there's 2 ways. The first one is called loading the trigger. It's when you do something small to bring yourself back to the product. So for example, when you send a message to someone on WhatsApp and they don't immediately reply, you're not getting an immediate reward. But what you are doing is loading the trigger because you're preparing a reply. And when that reply comes back in the form of an external trigger, it leads you through the whole cycle of trigger, action, reward once again. So the second way is stored value. So the more content, the more followers, the more reputation you have on a product, the more valuable it is to you. And the more valuable it is to you, the more likely you are to use it. Eventually it gets to a point where no external trigger is needed, because if you put yourself through the cycle of the hook enough times, the trigger moves from external to internal. So these habits ingrain into us when the product attaches itself to an emotion. When you're lonely, check Instagram. When you're bored, go on Reddit. When you're avoiding important work and it's causing you low-key stress, go on Netflix. Avoiding the discomfort is the internal trigger that makes you use these products. A commonly held belief is Freud's pleasure principle, which states that the only reason we're motivated to do anything is to pursue pleasure or to avoid pain. But it's not true according to Nir Eyal, who says that the only reason we do anything is just to avoid pain. And if you think you're pursuing pleasure, what you're actually doing a level below that is avoiding pain. If you can think of a compulsive action you do that isn't to avoid pain, let me know in the comments because I can't think of anything. So when you use things for distraction, it's a coping mechanism called displacement, which is where the mind substitutes a less threatening object to avoid dealing with the real object which is perceived as threatening. People end up in destructive cycles because they substitute genuine connection with something that can only provide false connection. For me, I think learning how to deal with discomfort is the key, because you can channel it for good and make it a force that can help you. There's a coping strategy called sublimation, where you direct your negative energy into positive behaviours. So you can channel the discomfort for traction rather than distraction. So one way to conquer distraction is to become more aware of your internal triggers. So for me, it's understanding that the reason I get distracted is because I'm trying to avoid the discomfort. And the main source of discomfort for me is avoiding doing challenging tasks or cognitively demanding work. So something that helped me was something I got from Headspace called mental noting. So mental noting is when you experience something, just simply noting what it is, and that creates distance between you and that object. So for example, with external triggers, when I heard my phone ding, instead of the immediate compulsive reaction to pick it up, I thought that's an external trigger. What was more difficult was mental noting for internal triggers. So when I felt the discomfort from avoiding work and then grabbing my phone, immediately thinking that that's an internal trigger that's made me do that. It's like a muscle where when you become aware of yourself distracted and pull yourself out of it, it's like a bicep curl for your brain. And the more you do, the stronger that muscle gets. It's a skill, and like any new skill, when you start at it, it's likely you won't be very good at it, and it will take practice. Using my own willpower to fight distraction is difficult because you only have a certain amount of willpower that you can use in a day. Nir Eyal talks about a powerful way to overcome your internal triggers is to set up a system. So a while back I tried out this system where I turned off all of my external triggers. So I turned off all sounds and notifications from my phone. But my app that tells me how much I've been looking at my phone told me that I was actually checking my phone more times. So I think what happened there was when I turned off all the external triggers, the internal triggers took over, which were more powerful. So like Mark Manson says, the emotional brain is way stronger than the thinking brain. So I can have 10 rational thoughts to not use my phone, but one emotional reason will overpower that. So I had to build on top of my system. So the second stage of the system was using my digital well-being app to set timers for all of my apps. So I used to set it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but this time I've decided to set it to 0 minutes. It's not that I'm trying to use my phone for 0 minutes in the day. It's used for when I try and pick up my phone and use it. If I tap on the app, it gives me the opportunity to check myself. It's like creating a door for the app where I have to knock on it to be able to enter. So this system helps because even if I'm not aware of the internal trigger, when I go on the app and it's locked, then it's a reminder for me to realise that's not what I had planned. And the only notifications that I let through are from my to-do list app, where I've planned what I wanted to be doing in that time. So anytime I catch myself distracted, all I do is ask myself the question, what did I have planned to do at this time? And then get on with that. So yeah, planning the day is another key aspect. So Nir Eyal talks about how there's only 3 reasons you get distracted: the internal triggers, external triggers, and planning problems. So I have a broad plan of the week that I'll make the week before, and then I'll plan the day the night before. So I used to think this was rigid and it wouldn't allow me to chill out properly, but what I found is if I allocate the time to chill out, then I'm way more relaxed in that time because I know I've got everything that I wanted to do out of the way. So remember, distraction is wired into humans. It's existed for time. Aristotle, thousands of years ago, spoke about acrasia, which is the nature of humans to do things against their better interests. So after recognizing discomfort, you can blame yourself or shame yourself, saying, I'm lazy or I've got a short attention span. But remember, there's nothing wrong with you specifically. It happens to everyone. If you want to know more about a system I use to stop me using my phone so much, check out this video. And if you want to see another random video, check out this. Otherwise, see you later.